I came home from a work trip, expecting to find a tired but familiar version of life. The soft hum of our son's cartoons echoing from the living room. The clatter of my wife in the kitchen pretending not to be overwhelmed. And maybe even that distant warmth we both had learned to fake well enough over the years. But instead, I walked into silence. Not the peaceful kind. A kind that's heavy, suspicious, off. Our son was curled up on the couch under a blanket, cheeks flushed, breathing shallow. My wife looked up, startled when I opened the door, like she wasn't expecting me. I remember the way her hand instinctively pulled her phone screen down before I could see it. The way she kissed my cheek a second too late, like she'd rehearsed the gesture, but missed her cue. And then, when I placed my hand on our son's forehead, the truth started to tug. He was burning up. Not just a mild fever. Not just a, he seems a little warm. No, this was something else. His skin felt like fire, and his little body was limp with exhaustion. I asked her how long he'd been like this, and she told me it had just started that afternoon, that she was going to monitor him before doing anything drastic. I nodded. I didn't argue. I wanted to believe her. I think for a while, I needed to. But that belief didn't last long. The next day, when things didn't improve, I drove him to the hospital myself. We waited 3 hours in the pediatric E before they admitted him. I didn't think anything of it until the nurse handed me his paperwork with the intake time and diagnosis summary. And that's when I saw it. The date of admittance wasn't today. It wasn't even yesterday. It was Sunday. I'd gotten home Monday night. He had already been admitted once and discharged. She had brought him in on Sunday, while I was gone, and then sent him home. And when I asked if he'd seen a doctor, she lied to my face, looked me in the eye, and told me she was just watching his temperature. I stared at that paper for a long time. It felt like something cracked open inside me, not loudly, not violently, just enough to let the doubt start leaking in. And once it started, it didn't stop. That night, I sat beside our son as he slept in the hospital bed, 4 in his arm, soft machines humming around us, and I kept going back to little details, things I hadn't paid attention to when I got home. The faint smell of cologne on our pillow that didn't belong to me. The guest towel in the bathroom that had been used but hadn't moved in weeks. The way she'd been glued to her phone. The faint trace of sweat on the sheets that didn't match the weather, or our recent lack of intimacy. There was something wrong, not just with her story, not just with her, with everything. And somewhere inside me, I already knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to admit it. She wasn't alone in our house when I was gone. And the man she brought in, the boy, had slept in the same bed where my son lay feverish and ignored in the next room. If you've ever sat in silence and realized that the person you trust most has been lying to your face, if you've ever walked into your own home and felt like a stranger in someone else's fantasy, you're not alone. This is my story, and this is Lies Unveiled. Subscribe if this hits home. I'll tell it all, not because I want revenge, but because sometimes the truth only has power when it's finally spoken out loud. People think infidelity starts in the bedroom. It doesn't. It starts in the quiet. In the sigh she lets out when she thinks you're not listening. In the way her laughter dims just slightly when she mentions someone else's name. In the way she starts turning her body ever so slightly away from you in bed. Like distance is a language she doesn't even realize she's speaking. But back then, I didn't see it. Or maybe I refused to. Emily, let's call her that, was my wife of 6 years. A university lecturer. Smart, articulate, beautifully composed in public, and effortlessly warm in private. She had this way of making people feel seen, heard, important. It's what made her a great teacher. It's also, I now realize, what made her dangerous. We met the way people meet when they still believe in things, in shared futures and slow dances in kitchens. I fell for her fast. Everyone did, but I was the one she chose. Or at least, I thought I was. Our first few years of marriage were peaceful, not perfect, not a whirlwind romance, but they had a rhythm. Dinner by 7, bedtime stories by 8, grading papers side by side in silence. It was ordinary, and I was grateful for it. She always seemed so stable, so grounded. And even on the days when she seemed tired or distant, I chalked it up to work. She mentored a lot of students, especially honor students doing research, and I always admired how committed she was. I never saw it as a threat. Why would I? Sometimes she'd come home and talk about one of her mentees, this or that thesis, the pressure, the long nights of editing. I listened, nodded, encouraged her. I trusted her. I trusted the structure of our life. I trusted that love was a kind of routine, something that didn't need constant proving if the foundation was there. I didn't realize she had started leaning into someone else emotionally, and maybe even physically. His name started coming up more and more. Jason. At first, just in passing. Then in anecdotes. Then in complaints. He's talented but lazy, she'd say, rolling her eyes, but with a half smile she didn't know she was wearing. I didn't ask questions. I told myself she was invested in her students, that she wanted the best for them, that maybe she just felt proud, like a mentor seeing a younger version of herself in someone with potential. But now, when I look back, I see it clearly. He was never just a student. He was a mirror, a fantasy, a way out. I remember one night, long before I ever suspected anything, when I got home late from a client meeting and found her already asleep on the couch, her laptop opened beside her. On the screen was a half-finished document, something about neural networks or AI ethics, I think. The title page reads Supervised by Dr. Emily Rhodes, and just below that, Jason M. MC candidate. I remember smiling to myself, proud of her, proud of them, proud that my wife was mentoring future thinkers. I had no idea that a few weeks later, that same student would be standing in my kitchen, wearing my shirt, drinking from my favorite coffee mug, and sleeping in my bed while I was away. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always knock. Sometimes it slides in through the smallest cracks, the ones you've trained yourself not to notice, the ones you mistake for, she's just tired, or it's just a phase. In hindsight, the signs were there. Not loud, not obvious, but present. Like how she started locking her phone, even around me. Or how she began taking showers late at night, long, hot showers that seemed more about escape than hygiene. Or the way her perfume changed. Subtle, yes, but no longer the soft floral she used to love. It was sharper now, younger, something new. She became more defensive, too. When I asked how her day was, she'd answer too quickly, like she was rehearsing it. The warmth in her stories was gone. Jason's name stopped coming up, which in itself was a red flag. At least when she talked about him, I knew she still felt the need to pretend there was nothing going on. But then, the silence replaced the stories. And that silence was colder than any lie. The first time I truly felt something was off was during intimacy. We hadn't been physical in weeks, maybe even months. And when we finally were, it felt like I was holding someone who wasn't really there. She flinched when I kissed her neck, the spot she used to melt into. She turned her head away when I tried to meet her eyes. Afterward, she cried. I thought it was guilt, maybe even stress. But now I know it was grief. Not for us, but for the double life she couldn't quite reconcile. And then there was the trip, a 3-day conference, just a few hours' drive. I remember telling her I could postpone it, that I had a bad feeling leaving her and our son for that long. But she insisted. Sighed she'd be fine. Sighed I was overthinking. When I got back, something felt wrong. The house had been cleaned, too cleaned, like someone had tried to erase something. The sheets were fresh, not just washed, but changed entirely. Different set, one we never used. My favorite mug, the one with the small chip on the handle, was missing. When I asked, she said she dropped it. I didn't push, but something in her eyes said otherwise. And then my son told me a story. Innocent, casual. Mommy had a friend sleep over. He played video games with me. He made the couch bed, but slept in your room. I laughed, out loud, because sometimes your brain breaks before your heart does. I told myself it was probably her brother, or maybe a cousin. I didn't ask, because deep down, I already knew the answer, and asking would have made it real. It happened on a Thursday, a nothing special, middle of the week, bring home takeout kind of Thursday. I had come back from work earlier than usual. The traffic had eased up unexpectedly, and I figured I'd surprise them. Maybe take our son out for ice cream before dinner. I didn't call. I didn't text. I walked through the front door quietly, keys still in hand, expecting to hear cartoons or the soft chatter of them playing. What I heard instead was silence. That same oppressive silence I'd started to hate. Then came the sound of footsteps upstairs. 2 sets. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she had a friend over. Maybe her sister. Maybe. But I knew better. I moved slowly, each step on the staircase sounding louder than the last. The door to our bedroom was half closed. I don't know what I expected to see. I really don't. But what I saw still managed to empty the air from my lungs. He was standing by the bed, shirtless, laughing. She was sitting on the edge of the mattress, hair tousled, wearing the oversized sleep shirt I bought her 2 Christmases ago, the one with the tiny stitched initials near the hem. They froze when they saw me. And I didn't yell. I didn't ask questions. I didn't move. I just stared. It was like watching your own life through someone else's window, detached, muted, surreal. My wife, my home, my bed, my ruin. He looked like a child, young, nervous, eyes wide like a student caught cheating on an exam. She didn't even look surprised, just tired. I turned and walked out, down the stairs, out the front door, into my car. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the steering wheel, my fingers clenched so tightly they ached. I drove aimlessly for a while. No music, no destination, just silence. It wasn't until the next morning that I went looking for the truth. Not the emotional kind. I'd already felt enough of that. I needed proof. Something undeniable. Something I couldn't gaslight myself out of. So I did what I'd never done before. I opened her laptop. It wasn't even hidden. The messages were there, in her email, her chat threads, her downloads folder. Photos, videos, screenshots, and one clip I'll never unsee. She was in our bedroom, alone, or so I thought. The camera was angled low. She was undressing, laughing, whispering his name. Then she looked into the lens and said something I can't repeat. It wasn't just sex. It was worship. And it broke me. Not just because of what she did, but because of what she didn't do. Because while she was filming herself for him, our son had a fever in the next room. Because while she was playing house with a boy she was supposed to mentor, I was out there trying to keep our family together. Because when I finally confronted her, days later, she didn't cry. She didn't deny it. She just looked at me and said, "I didn't think you'd come home early." And in that moment, I realized I had already lost her. Long before the sex, long before the messages, long before the camera. She had left me quietly. She just hadn't bothered to move out. There's a silence that settles after betrayal. Not the kind you hear, but the kind that soaks into the walls, into the floorboards, into every breath. We stayed in the same house for 10 more days. 10. I counted them not by calendar dates, but by the number of nights I spent on the couch, pretending to sleep while the ceiling stared back at me. Each night longer than the last. She moved into the guest room. No conversation, no apology, just quiet avoidance. We passed each other in the kitchen like strangers at a bus stop, polite, detached, barely making eye contact. The only thing we spoke about was our son, and even that was mechanical. He has a cough. He didn't eat much. I gave him Tylenol. There were moments I wanted to scream, to throw a plate, to demand she explain how we ended up here. But I didn't, because what was the point? When someone shows you that they no longer care, silence becomes the only dignified response. Our son, sweet and oblivious, was the only thing keeping us tethered to the performance of normalcy. We read books to him together, ate dinner across the same table. She even laughed once, a soft, hollow sound that made me nauseous. And still, I didn't confront her. Not directly, because some part of me still hoped she'd wake up, that she'd realize what she'd done, that she'd look at me with regret or guilt or something human. But she didn't. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find her on the phone. She didn't hear me come in. Her voice was low, affectionate, intimate. It wasn't the tone you use with family. It was the tone you use with someone you're still excited by. She ended the call when she saw me, put the phone down slowly, didn't offer an explanation, and I didn't ask for one. We were past that now. That evening, after I put our son to bed, I sat alone in the backyard. The air was cool, the sky cloudless. I listened to the hum of the neighborhood, cars passing, dogs barking, distant laughter, and I realized I was no longer angry, just empty. There's a kind of grief that comes not from death, but from understanding that someone you loved never truly existed the way you imagined. She had been gone long before Jason ever touched her, and I had been alone long before I noticed. The moment I knew I had to leave wasn't traumatic. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't her admitting anything or me catching them again. It was a Tuesday morning. I was brushing my teeth, getting ready for work, and I heard her humming in the kitchen. The same song she used to hum when things were good, when she loved me, or at least pretended to well enough that I believed it. And I realized, she had moved on. She wasn't mourning what she'd done. She wasn't shattered. She wasn't tormented. She was humming, like nothing had happened. And I was still there, sleeping on the couch, carrying the weight of something that clearly didn't weigh on her at all. That's when I decided I wouldn't let this be my life. Not for another day. I waited until she left for campus that afternoon. Then I sat down at the dining table, the same one where we used to plan vacations, talk about our son's milestones, where I once carved our anniversary date into the underside like some lovesick teenager. And I opened my laptop. I created a new bank account, transferred everything that was mine, not out of pettiness, but protection. Then I called a divorce attorney, someone a friend had quietly recommended months ago. When he noticed my eyes stop lighting up every time I said her name. I didn't even flinch when I said the words. I want to file. As soon as possible. By Friday, the paperwork was drafted. That night, I slept next to my son for the last time in that house. His tiny hand curled around two of my fingers. He looked so peaceful, untouched by the mess we had made around him. I whispered in the dark, "I'm sorry. For everything. For staying this long. For pretending things were okay. For letting you breathe the air of something already rotting." I packed quietly the next morning. Just essentials. A suitcase. My journals. A few photographs, not of her, but of him. His first steps. His gap-toothed smile. She didn't try to stop me. Didn't ask where I was going. Didn't even look up from her phone. I left the divorce papers on the kitchen counter, beneath the fruit bowl. It felt poetic, in a way. Rot hidden under ripeness. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't cry. I didn't break. I just breathed. For the first time in a long, long while. The apartment I moved into was small. Barely enough space for 2 beds, a couch, and a table. But it was mine. The walls were thin, the floor creaked, and the water pressure was laughable. But it was honest. There was no ghost of perfume on the pillows. No mysterious mugs in the sink. No secrets hidden in the sheets. Just me and him. I had managed to secure joint custody quickly, thanks to the evidence I brought to the lawyer. No courtroom drama. No contest. Just paperwork, signed and sealed with the same quiet apathy she had given everything else. He came to stay with me on weekends first, and Wednesdays too. Eventually, more. He never asked where Mommy was. He never asked why we lived somewhere new. He just followed me, trusted me, like kids do when they don't have the language yet for disappointment. We built a new rhythm together. Pancakes on Saturdays. Lego marathons on rainy afternoons. Bedtime stories where I did all the voices. And sometimes, in the quiet, when he was asleep and I was sitting by the window, I would let myself grieve. Not for her, not even for what we lost, but for the version of me that thought love was permanent, just because vows were exchanged. Healing doesn't come in grand moments. It comes in the mornings when you make the bed by yourself and don't feel like crying. It comes in the grocery store when you reach for the cereal he likes instead of the one you used to share with her. It comes when your son laughs, belly deep, and for the first time in months, you laugh too, not because you're forcing it, but because it bubbles up on its own. I still had nights where I woke up and checked my phone instinctively, expecting a message from her. Some last attempt at redemption. Some flicker of remorse. But there was nothing. Just silence. And eventually, that silence stopped sounding like punishment. It started sounding like peace. We don't always get closure from the people who hurt us. Sometimes we write it ourselves. In bedtime routines, in long walks, in holding our child's hand and realizing, this right here is the only piece of the past worth keeping. Some people think betrayal ends with confrontation. It doesn't. It ends quietly, in the days after, in the space where love used to live, in the way you learn to breathe again, without choking on what could have been. I don't hate her. I used to think I needed to. That hating her would give me power, closure, a sense of justice. But hate is just another way of holding on. And I've let go. What she did, bringing a student into our home, our bed, while our child was sick in the next room, that isn't something I'll ever forget. But it's something I've stopped letting define me. She became someone I no longer recognize. And I, eventually, became someone I could respect again. Not because I moved on to someone new, but because I came back to myself. If you've lived through something like this, if you've been lied to, replaced, overlooked, I want you to know this. You are not what they did to you. You are what you decide to do after. You can scream. You can cry. You can go silent. You can walk away with dignity. There is no right way to survive betrayal, but surviving it is already enough. So if this story hits somewhere deep, if a part of you recognized the silence, the ache, the questions that never got answered, I'm glad you stayed. We don't tell stories like this to reopen wounds. We tell them to name the pain, to take back what was stolen, and maybe, just maybe, to remind each other that healing is possible, even in the smallest ways. Thank you for listening. This has been Lies Unveiled. If my story stayed with you, please consider subscribing. We share real, quiet stories like this every week, not to shock, but to connect. And if you've been through something you've never said out loud, the comments are open. We'll hold space for you. Until next time, take care of your heart. But speaking can be strength. And remember, silence can be survival.